We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, speaking with Liberty Nation's Editor-in-Chief, Lisa K. Donner. Now, in the last segment, we discussed the correlation between mass shooters and SSRIs. But now I want to dive a little more into the mind of school shooters and the disaster of the gun debate. Lisa, you've done a lot of research on the kind of person responsible for these school shootings. What's the profile?
Well, the demographics are interesting. They're almost exclusively white males. Some of them are as young as 12 and 13 years old, but the average age of a school shooter is 17. That's really young. You know, these are challenging teenage years, and, there's a lot of isolation going on with the pandemic, and who knows if that's exacerbated the situation.
It certainly seems likely, doesn't it? Added pressure on the pressure of already being a youngster. Now, you wrote in an article on this particular topic where you examined the mind and the motivations of school shooters specifically. And you wrote that they see themselves as kings. And what does that mean?
Well, to a man, and I think we can safely say that to a boy or young man, because I don't even know of any perpetrator that is female. They're, again, almost always male, white male, average age 17. And statistics show most of these boys come from homes where the father isn't present, and part of the problem, I think, in development when you don't have a father is you're always looking to make a connection. And if you're a loner, you're isolated, you don't have any friends, you can't really talk to your mom about things that you might want to talk to a male about. It can be very, very psychologically challenging, especially the teenage years are hard. I mean, I don't know anybody that had great teenage years. I certainly didn't.
Yeah, the teenage years themselves are a rite of passage, and then to have the modern pressures applied to them. I do want to drill down into this thing where the shoots, they kind of have this image that they're a king, and if the world would only see them as they are, they would make them a king. What is that about?
Well, maybe it's because they are so isolated and so lonely. They're trying to, somehow make themselves greater. They certainly want to stand out from the crowd. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the publicity, some of them mentioned that everyone's going to hear about me, everyone's going to know me, this has been written. And, we ought to take that seriously. There is some kind of delusions of grandeur in the background, but we also need to look at the connection between the school and the shooter. Statistics show that 43% of the time, Mark, the shooter was a current student at the school. Now, 20% there's no connection, but by almost a 3-to-1 margin, the violence was targeted rather than random. So what's going on in those school environments?
I think that there's two elements there. The first one being we live in such an age where instead of a child wanting to grow up, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a train driver. I want to be a YouTuber, I want to be famous. And there's this quest for fame, and it's almost as though all the media.
Let me just interject. I really do think it has something to do with the social media platforms, because kids start comparing. How many followers do you have? How many people are liking your posts? And it becomes kind of a competitive thing, rather than just, something to openly share and information on.
Yeah, they seem to think that the kind of social media interaction they get is a measure of their value. Now, the second point I want to bring up is the one that you talked about with schools there. And I think it's quite telling that most of these people, as you say, it's 40+%, have current students at the school, but they don't appear unhinged in a way that shows they're unable to grasp reality. I mean, almost all these attacks, they take place in gun-free zones. And the schools where they go are gun-free zones, which I figure demonstrates that they have made a certain reasoned plan. And surely this fact alone supports the idea that if we want to protect schools, we need trained, tested, armed people there to stop these glory seekers as they are.
Well, for sure. I mean, if you were a gunman, you had a choice to go into an inner city school, which has, security guards, it's got metal detectors, or to go into a nice little safe suburban community where, it's a gun-free school zone and there's likely nobody, paying attention, which one would you shoot up? But again, if 43% of them are happening in schools that are correlated to the shooter, we should look at that educational environment. Are these people just slipping through the cracks? Is anybody paying attention?
Yeah, we always hear about the red flags that went up beforehand, and they've got these social media posts where they're saying they're going to do something, or they've with this latest one where the boy filmed himself with a bag of dead cats, and nobody seemed to realize that this is a marker. I mean, surely this came through at some point in his school career and education.
Well, yeah,
there was something wrong.
You're right. This deranged behavior is just being passed by. Like I said, you can kind of see it on the bodies of some of these kids. And as I mentioned in our previous segment, there are nihilistic tendencies with these kids. 86% of these shooters died in the attack, and many of them suicidal.
Yeah, it's almost like I believe it's called death by cop. Is they want to get themselves in a position where they can gain the fame, the notoriety, but never have to deal with the consequences of what they've done, either emotionally, physically, or in a grander scheme of thing. Now, let's jump on to the topic of guns in general. Why do you think the gun debate in America can't seem to move beyond the tool involved? I mean, we've just discussed the psyche, the markers that we've seen with these disturbed young men. But the media and politicians, they can't move beyond the idea that guns are to blame. I mean, a firearm, it's just a tool like any other, can be used for good or bad. Just for an example here, in Europe, where guns are far harder to get than in the United States, we have a knife crime epidemic.
Well, again, I think it's an easy target, excuse the pun. And, we have myriad laws on the books, Mark, about gun control. There's just a mountain of things that you have to go through in a lot of states concerning concealed carry. Look, gun rights are really an issue for the left, and they're using this as a wedge. It doesn't really make logical sense, because if you look at the numbers, like you said, this last guy, Crimo or whatever.
Robert Crimo, yeah.
Crimo, they went to his house and they took away umpteen knives. So anything can be used as a weapon. It just so happens that, the AR-15 is the weapon of choice. And so it's easy to demonize the weapon rather than, nobody wants to demonize the person. Nobody wants to demonize certainly a teenager. But you have to look at what is causing this behavior, what's going on in these environments. Are there some psychiatric medications that, like as I alluded to in your last segment with selective serotonin uptake inhibitors, these are all factors that need to be dialed into and looked at if we really want to responsibly take on this issue of school shootings.
One final question for you, Lisa, that leads off from that. Do you think part of the reason that people aren't willing to look into all of these myriad reasons, SSRIs, unhappy home lives, poor education things, could it be because that nobody wants to admit that years of pushing divisive, cognitive dissonance inducing, progressive ideas has led to an overall unhealthy psyche for America's youth?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's face it, there's culture rot in this society. You look at the games, the television shows, the movies, everything. It all spirals down from there. And if you're growing a crop of young people who don't even care if they live, that their own future is not worth saving, you can bet your bottom dollar that they're not going to care whether yours is either.
Lisa K. Donner, thank you ever so much.
You're welcome, Mark.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. And remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation on KSRM 920 AM and 92.5 FM out of Kenai, Alaska. Later on, we talk Supreme Court impeachment with Scott Cosenza. But up next, after this short break, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris seem to have a failure to communicate. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.